So for full context, I'm not going to read this article. I've already read this article, but I do want to make sure that we're all on the same page about what we're talking about here. So for those of you that aren't in the know, the New York Times posted an op-ed piece by Tish Harrison Warren on January 30th, 2022. Now, Ms. Warren is very well known for her op-eds. Writes quite a few. I hope her pronouns are she, her. If they are not, I apologize, Tish Harrison Warren. I'm going to assume. But the name of the article is Why Churches Should Drop Their Online Services. Again, an op-ed from New York Times, January 30th, 2022. Well-known opinion writer, writes a lot, and is also an Anglican theologian. So the article itself is an interesting one. It's an interesting argument. It's obviously a clickbait title, okay? It's fairly true. Good clickbait normally is true, by the way. Good clickbait is normally true. And this is a perfect example of that. Why churches should drop their online services. Her argument goes into this whole discussion on the both and of the online church. So she's talking about COVID happened because it happened, and we had to improvise. We had to come up with something. And so we started to do online church worship. And so people started to stream their online worship services. And as the Bible said, it was good, right? It was good for a while. It worked. But now, according to Ms. Warren, things have changed. And it's time for us to not just step back into the church building, but it is time for us to drop and delete our online option. And she cites a lot of different arguments about this. The author cites multiple arguments about this. However, there's a couple of things that I want to touch on. There's a couple of things that I vehemently disagree with. There are a couple points that I really don't disagree with. Her point she's making, but I'm just not quite sure if it's really hitting the point. So I just want to highlight a couple of different little bits and pieces. What I'm not going to weigh in on, okay? First and foremost, let's lay the ground rules. What I'm not going to weigh in on is the argument that she is being ableist against vulnerable population, okay? I agree that she is, to a certain extent, being very ableist in this and that it's problematic, okay? However, that argument is already being made everywhere, okay? And so I don't need to make that argument because, first off, I am not someone from the I'm not someone from that community. I'm not someone from that culture. I don't feel like I am a voice that could adequately speak on this. If I were a bigger name, if I were a bigger entity and had bigger connections, then I would sure love to talk to able gamers and see what Steve Spahn thinks about this idea of online community building, because I have a feeling that maybe Steve Spahn would have some more specific ideas than I might have. So I'm not going to weigh in on that. First off, because I'm not from the community. Second off, because I think it's already being done, and I think it's already being done pretty doggone well. So I'm not going to be making that argument, okay? The second thing I'm not going to be doing is attacking the author. I think ad hominem attacks are unfortunate, and I think that I don't think that Ms. Warren had any intentions of harming people. Even if she did, I don't think she intended to. I don't think this is an act of intentional harm. This is an act of maybe manslaughter, right? This is an act of accidental damage being done. Regardless, I'm going to attempt as best as I can to address the argument rather than the author, just because I just don't think there's any warrant there. I'm seeing a lot of that online, and it's really unfortunate. I don't know if anybody saw, but she pretty much posted this and ran, which means she knows what she's doing, which maybe she did intend to do harm then. I don't know. She knew this was going to be a hot topic, and it was a hot topic, but that still doesn't justify doing harm. Okay? Do good, do no harm, strive to go. I'm not going to do harm. Okay. So here's the thing. The ultimate caveat here is that she isn't talking about Checkpoint Church. She isn't. There's no way. There's no way that she's talking about Checkpoint Church. Doesn't understand what's going on here. Very, very specific resource going on here. There's a very, very specific argument. And the biggest crime that this author does commit is that there's no nuance that other examples of this can exist. Checkpoint Church is not established in a traditional church setting. We never have been. We are not a part of an anchor church. For those of you unfamiliar with this terminology, a church plant, a new church start, has a couple of different models. One of them is that they would go down the street to the mega church down the road and say, hey, would you like to plant a church? And they would say, sure. And then they'll give them money to start that church. They'll give them people to be the leadership of that church. And it'll be a thing, not a satellite necessarily, but a thing that exists out of an existing structure. Checkpoint is not that. We are called a parachute drop. It's a metaphor, just like it sounds like. We are given a plot of land and a parachute, metaphorically, and we're told to jump out of the plane and see what we can find there. Our location, our city district that we were assigned is not a physical one. We were assigned to a culture. We were assigned to a demographic. We were assigned to the digital space of Twitch and Discord and YouTube. So we are inherently not an existing worship structure that is then going online. We are only online. So this article isn't about us. That doesn't mean that it's a good argument. And so I'm going to try to address the things that I think are the most difficult and the things that just in our community prove that there is nuance available. I don't think that our nuance is the only nuance, but my goal with this is just to say there is nuance in our scenario. And if there's nuance in our scenario, then odds are there's nuance in a lot of other scenarios. Another one of my main arguments that I make in pretty much all of my videos and nerdy sermons is that God can do what God wants to do. And if God wants to build digital embodied communities, God can build digital communities. I feel like that's not a hot take. Maybe that's a hot take. Hopefully, that's not a hot take, but I feel like that is pretty honest and pretty good. We'll save all the redemptions towards the end of this chat, which hopefully shouldn't go on that much longer. But I want to highlight just a couple of articles and talk about some things that I think are unfortunate. So the first one is this quote: whether or not one attends religious services, people need embodied community. So this is the argument that the author is making pretty much throughout the entire thing, is the argument that we need to drop online churches because online churches aren't creating embodied community. That can only be created in physical space, through touch, through smell, through hugs and embraces and songs and all that stuff. So, whether or not one attends religious services, people need embodied community. And then the author says, we find that in book clubs or having friends over for dinner. So what the author's doing here is saying, hey, look, the church isn't the only place that this is happening. Physical embodiment happens elsewhere. Do you know where else we're finding embodiment? I can list a few. I've never felt so embodied as in our Discord community. I feel embodied in that space where we're creating real embodied community, where we're tuning in with one another, we're checking on one another, we're loving one another, we're creating community with one another, we're hosting book clubs, we're having lunch together, we're having meals and time spent in a third space. That's where I see embodiment happening. I see embodiment happening through D&D. And do you know where a lot of people play D&D? On Discord and Roll20 and through Zoom and through these other spaces. That's where we're finding our embodiment. We're literally embodying other characters. We're embodying other spaces. We're embodying fantasy lands together through digital formats. Let's see. Stained Glass says the idea that embodiment is only physical is non-biblical. Paul spends a lot of time talking about our resurrected bodies being in a spiritual nature. For sure, and it even goes beyond, like we just have to acknowledge, right, that we can try to put whatever parameters we want on things, but at the end of the day, the argument goes back to God can do what God wants to do. And if we are inherently spiritual creatures, if we are, then that means that we can go beyond just the physical means, right? Jesus came and imbued within an incarnate body which means that there is something other than an incarnate body. Le gasp. So, if the argument is, regardless of religiosity, people need embodied community, and they're finding it in book clubs and having friends over for dinner, let's continue listing places that they're finding embodied community. There are more places. Just because you list 2 that are physical doesn't mean that there aren't more. That's the end there. Okay, another one. Christians need, this was actually a citation from a previous Times essay from Colin Hansen. It says, Christians need to hear the babies crying in church. They need to see the reddened eyes of a friend across the aisle. They need to chat with a recovering drug addict who shows up early but still sits in the back row. They need to taste the bread and wine. They need to feel the choir crescendo towards the assurance of hope and what our senses can't yet perceive. So what's happening here is that the author is playing to a sense of emotion, right? A pathos. Responding to a pathos within us, a sense of feeling that we receive within the church. I used to always call it the hair on the back of the neck feeling, where you literally feel the hairs on the back of your neck raising up with those kind of like chills down the spine, right? Do you know where else those happen to me? Do you remember the very first 15 minutes of The Last of Us? Where you have to drag your daughter out of the house as this incredible thing is happening, this awful circumstance, and then you hold her after she's been shot and dies in your arms. Pathos, man. That's pathos. That's feeling. Do you remember that moment? Okay, sure, the end of Halo 3, the movies that we go to. We could keep listing moments, even taking more moments, right? What about that moment where your favorite streamer gets that platinum trophy? That's a big moment. That's an exciting feeling. That's a hair on the back of your neck. So if we're talking about embodiment just being through pathos, hey, guess what? We can all make lists. We can all make lists of times we've had that feeling. We can all describe moments that we've experienced that exact thing. Every Wednesday night we play games together and we hang out in our secret room over on the Discord. That's genuine laughter. I've had tears come to my eyes with the joy of spending time with others. Embodiment, if embodiment comes through pathos, then I can list my own moments where I've experienced that same thing. Nuance. Nuance. Another quote. One might ask, this is the big point. One might ask, why not have both? Okay, that is a great question. That's kind of what I'm saying. Not exactly, but it's kind of what I'm saying. Why not have both? Why not meet in person with COVID precautions in place, but also continue the option of live streamed service? Because offering church online implicitly makes embodiment elective. This one I might get a little nasty on. Here's what I want to challenge you to, okay? So the argument being made here, why should we not have both? Because if we have both, we make embodiment elective. What if I said, okay, maybe that's a worthy sacrifice. Maybe it's okay if we worship our embodiment more than we worship our electivism. I'm going to let that marinate. Maybe it's okay if we worship our embodiment more than we worship our electivism. If I had to choose between elective embodiment or not embodiment at all, well, then the nerds who are never going to come to church are not going to be embodied in the slightest. So maybe making it elective is not the end of the world, because those that want to be there are going to be there, and those that aren't going to be there are hopefully going to be finding it in the third spaces that we're creating. Is elective embodiment such a bad thing? And of those two words, which one is more important? I think that embodiment is more important than our elective ability to choose. I think we should be able to choose if we want to, because the truth is, there is still election, isn't there? What choice do we have in our physical embodiment? The choice not to go. That's elective, man. Nuance. You can't take it out. You cannot eliminate it. You can't take that ability away. So all we're doing is providing another instance, not taking one away. Okay, another quote. This is two more quotes just to kind of round up my argument here that there's nuance to pretty much every point that the author makes. About 4 years ago, my family had a group of people from our church in their early 20s over to our house. We shared a meal and asked them what hopes and challenges our church offered to their generation. Their answers surprised me. Over and over they said one of the hardest and best things about church was that they had to sit with people of different ages, classes, and political beliefs. It was a practice they found inconvenient, yes, but truly grounding, nourishing, and good. So the argument here is that the internet is an echo chamber. And that's not untrue. That's not untrue. There are certainly aspects of the internet which are echo chambers. But this conversation happened around a dinner table with 20-somethings, and I'm assuming this person who was not in her 20-somethings whenever she had this conversation. Yes, that happened around a table, and that was good. That's a good thing. Talking about intergenerational relationships is a good thing. Having intergenerational relationships is a good thing. But just saying it doesn't mean that that's not possible in digital spaces. I think a lot of times people that are not digital natives hear the word digital native and they assume millennial, which I happen to be. Or they hear the term digital native and they assume Gen Z. But the truth is, in our Discord alone, which is small, really, I mean, we have less than 200 people in our Discord, which we're incredibly excited about. But compared to, I don't know, pick your favorite streamer. Odds are they have a bigger Discord community than we do. And just in our Discord community alone, we span the generational gap all the way down from the lowest available age in the terms of service of 13 years of age, all the way up. I don't even know the top age, but I know we're probably in our 60s. As far as our newsletter, we have somebody, our oldest person that is subscribed to our newsletter is 97 years old. Just because you say something doesn't make it necessarily true. And to believe that the internet is only limited to one generation, and that generation being the digital natives that you think spans about 5 years, it's just not true. It's just not true. Look at our verbiage, right? Like, look at the chat of Twitch versus the chat of YouTube versus the chat of Facebook Live versus the chat of fill in the blank here. All the way up to Stained Glass. Stained Glass is our 97-year-old. So you go across this gamut of these different chat platforms, and I would implore you to find one that has the same culture. Like, odds are not many people on Facebook Live saying Pog. Probably not. I'm going to bet it's minimal. I'm not going to say it's non-existent, but I'm going to bet compared to Twitch, I'm going to say there's less people saying Pog on Facebook than there are on Twitch. These are different cultures that are being created. These are different communities made up of a vast number of ages. Just to assume that we're limited to one age, I can't imagine anything more intergenerational. I can't imagine anything more diverse than the internet. Yes, we click. Yes, we tend to find pockets of the internet that speak more to our sort of thing. But that's just human nature, man. That's just tribalism. That's what we do anyway. We do that in our churches. Come on. Who's in the United Methodist Men? It ain't the 20-somethings. Come on. We do that naturally. The work of intergenerational diversity exists everywhere, not just on the internet. We're all doing our best. But to try and lump that onto the digital church is just not fair. Final quote, and I think this is a good point to end on. Okay, so up until this point, the nuance that I've made available is that pretty much for every single one of her arguments, you could do the exact same thing for the digital church and make the same argument. The only reason that this is picking up as it is first off because a lot of people don't like it. Second off, because the traditional church already existed. It's the one that's winning the war because it has already been around. But all of the arguments presented in this particular article could be continued on or twisted with nuance and be made in the same way for the digital church. So there's no real argument being made other than, hey, hear my experience. Which if I were to write the same article, and I could, about, hey, here's my experience, I could write the exact same article called Why You Should Drop Your Physical Church. And I could make the exact same argument without any nuance, saying that my way is right because I'm the one that experienced it. But in our Wesleyan tradition, we don't just believe in experience. We have a quadrilateral. We have reason, tradition, right? We have these things that add into what we're doing. If our tradition is to go and deliver beyond, that's what we're doing. That's what's happening in digital spaces. There's always nuance. There's always nuance. And God is always going to do what God can do. And if we try to put God within our own little box, based off our own experience alone, we're just going to come up short. And then there's this argument. This is the author's final closing point. This is coming right after the one we just read about these 20-somethings talking about how much they learned from intergenerational diversity. This is the quote. But for these digital natives, so now she's calling the digital natives out. For these digital natives, the stubborn analog wonders of skin, handshakes, hugs, bread and wine, faces, names, and spontaneous conversation is part of what intrigued them and kept them going to church. These things are what intrigued them and kept them going to church. They don't go to church. They don't! They aren't! That's the whole problem! The whole reason we're doing this is because that's not enough. The whole thing is that your handshakes and your passing of the peace is not enough. Because they're not going. The church has dipped below 50% Christian for the first time in a very, very long time. The truth is that they aren't curious about your physical tradition. They aren't. This was such a weak ending. This was the weakest ending I've ever read to an article, I have to say. To just outright say the opposite of the truth as your conclusion. They are finding community elsewhere. The reason that we are on Twitch is not because there is a huge Christian presence on Twitch. Do you understand? We're not here because this is where the Christians are. We're here because this is where all the Christians went when they left the church. I don't know. I don't know what else to say. The truth of the matter is that there's more nuance to the entire argument until the very end where the author presents the opposite of the truth. Presents like the church is thriving because we're shaking hands. Because we're hearing babies crying. I love the sound of a baby crying and laughing in church. I think that's amazing. But just because I love it doesn't change the fact that the church is dying. It doesn't change the fact. And so that's why I say, at the very beginning of this argument, the reason why I said this author is not talking about us is because I don't think that they are. But the words that they're saying are impacting us. And so that's why I felt the need to put this out there, is just to say it is being done. It's not just a case of, hey, I can make an argument for anything and I can provide nuance for anything, but rather that the nuance I'm providing is real, is lived, and is an instance of what is happening here, right now, in this place. Checkpoint Church is experiencing this. The thing that this author is saying is not possible or is not being done is being done. And we are reaching people that the church has not reached in a long time. So the truth is, whoever has convinced this person that the reason that the young people are still interested in church is because of handshakes and skin and hugs and bread and wine and faces and names and spontaneous conversations, they aren't. They aren't curious about it. They're leaving. Oh. Any questions? Any questions or additional thoughts? I see Dane the Pain. Dane the Pain said, my 2 cents as someone leading a white-haired traditional church. What is so wrong with both and? Can't both meet the mission? Why is it always one over the other? So the author here literally makes that claim of like, why not? And it's because of embodiment being elective if we offer both and. And my argument against that was that I think we might worship electivism too much. I do. I still think that. One of my good mentors and friends, Jason Moore, does both and for a lot of conferences and teaches about this kind of like integrating these two things. And I think that's great. I have a lot of thoughts on how to do online church properly. And if you should, one of my big hot take issues is that I have a problem with churches that just want to post their live stream on Facebook and then walk away. So, I have thoughts too. I have thoughts that of how this is being done poorly. I have thoughts of how this is being done well. I have thoughts of how to change it. I have thoughts of how we could do better. I have all sorts of thoughts. But to make the argument that churches should drop their online service without considering the nuance of the situation is just not fair. It's not even reaching the true crux of the issue. You hit me. We just live stream the worship. I mean, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. I just disagree with it as far as what's your purpose, right? Are you wanting to reach the homebound? Then you're doing exactly what you should. Are you wanting to reach new people? I wouldn't recommend Facebook. Stained Glass says, I hear babies cry at every single leadership meeting. They aren't infants, though. Yep. And that was one of the things that I tweeted out about this is like, so this article is popping off. This article is causing a lot of turmoil. It's getting a lot of hate. It's getting a lot of love. It's getting a lot of weird reactions from people that you wouldn't expect. For instance, Mike Cosper, I was not expecting his response to this. But nonetheless, this is not a new argument. Like, nobody's floored by this argument. Nobody's like, oh, I can't believe how good of an argument this author made. I hear this every day, dude. I hear this from everyone in church leadership of all time. Thankfully, I've met the right people that are willing to support what we're doing and give us a thumbs up and continue to innovate and figure out what the future looks like. But like, this is not a new argument. It's not an interesting argument, right? It's a flatline, non-nuance with the wrong conclusion. But yes, next to violence in video games, exactly. It's just so weird. It's just so weird, and it's so unfortunate that it's gotten the level of power. The truth of the matter is that Checkpoint is a shining example of why it's wrong, of why the argument misses the point. And of how truly easy it would be. That's what I thought about doing. We have a newsletter tomorrow, and I still might do this, so we'll see. I haven't written the newsletter yet. But I could write the opposite. I could write the exact opposite view, right? And still make the same claim. It's just, it's just weak. It's just weak. But I have no problem with what the author is actually like trying to get at. I think it is a thing. It is a real thing that we're experiencing. Like we are experiencing this struggle, this wrestling between these two things. And so kudos for attacking it and seeing what they can do. But it's just weak. I think that a deeper study of communion and the Eucharist, now that would have been compelling. And I would have read that. I would have paid for that with a smile on my face rather than with a frown. The Eucharist is the bigger issue at hand for me. I think that's the more of a hot button. Embodiment? Weak sauce, dude. Embodiment is not the issue. To say that embodiment is the issue is just a glaring red sign that this person has never experienced what we've got going on at Checkpoint. Or not even make it specifically about us. Never experienced Twitch. Never experienced Discord. Never experienced these community building platforms. The most they do is they go on Twitter and they voice their opinions. That's not community. You can have a Twitter community, but that's not it. We've talked about this long enough. If we have any more thoughts or questions, I would encourage you to, if you're watching this on YouTube, first off, hi YouTube, let us know your thoughts. Drop down in the comments anything that you might think or might feel about this issue. Do you disagree? Do you agree? Do you see more possibility for nuance? What do you think? What do you think about this? Do you think that this is a fair argument? This is a fair rebuttal? I just feel like there is there's something more to this, right? There's something more than just a simple article can cover. You know what I mean? Something more than just a simple article could cover. There's more to this. A deeper dive into the Eucharist, again, that would have been a more interesting and compelling argument. But just purely saying that you can't do embodiment online, got to grow up, man. You got to grow up. Embodiment can and is being done. And God is doing it.